Sarah Davey.
And I'm James Routledge.
And this is Books Unpacked.
Join us as we chat to people from across the publishing industry to unpack the life cycle of a book.
Pop the kettle on, get comfy, and we'll get started. Hello Ed, it's lovely to have you here. I'm Sarah, obviously. This is James. Welcome to Books Unpacked.
Ed, firstly, thank you so much for your time, but I guess what we'd love to start with is a bit of the basics right from the beginning. I mean, who are you? And I guess if you could give us a quick summary of kind of what your day-to-day job entails would be lovely.
You want a potted biography of a literary agent. So my name is Ed Wilson. I am a literary agent, one of the directors at an agency called Johnson Alcock. We've been going since the 1950s, although obviously I have not been going since the 1950s. We're not one of the oldest, we're not one of the youngest. We're an agency that's well established, and we have a broad list of all kinds of commercial, literary, lots of estates, playwrights, poets, the full gamut of the literary world. My own list, I look after most of the estates. And have my own list of up-and-coming and established crime writers, thriller writers, literary writers. I do lots of science fiction and fantasy, and really all points in between. So I have a pretty broad list, and that's the way I like it.
This is jumping in with a question that's just popped in my head, but this will happen a lot with me. How many authors does an agent represent? Because it sounds like lots.
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever actually counted up. So it's slightly different for me. So because I inherited a client list from our former chairman, as well as the authors that I've taken on myself. I think most agents would have anything between 20, 30 and 100 authors. Some authors require a huge amount of day-to-day work. Some will produce a book every 5 years. So it varies. I think every agent makes a decision about how much time they have and how much space they have. My own client list, I've probably got between 40 and 50 estates. So usually those books will be, so estate is an author who's died. You have 70 years of copyright after the author dies. So those books will usually be in print and so require relatively little maintenance. But we still sell translation rights and film rights. Active authors, I'm always looking for new ones, but at any given time, I'll be editing and submitting no more than 15 or 20 new writers.
And how do you find the balance then? I mean, it's obviously a quite hands-on job. For your day-to-day, I mean, is it just whatever has landed on the desk that morning, or are you kind of working backwards quite a lot?
We try to be a little bit more strategic than that. To a certain extent, you have to be reactive. There are certain elements you can plan. So I will only sign up a new writer if I have space. Then again, if I read something that I can't resist, then I will make space for it. Then as part of your initial chat with that writer, you will plan a timeline for editing a book, for submitting it, for when that first book is going to be published, for when they're going to deliver a second book. As part of that, you have to factor in all the other bits, so audio rights, film and TV rights, translation rights. So there are elements of the job that have to be carefully planned out over a period of years. At the same time, there's an email that comes in one morning and suddenly everything goes out the window. Often authors who win awards or are shortlisted or just generally are moving in the kind of public consciousness, have a brilliant review, and suddenly everything starts moving much faster. So there is a lot of planning involved, but most plans go out the window when something exciting happens.
So what's your first point of contact with an author then? Would that be maybe an open submission to the agency in general, or do people tend to come to you directly? I mean, how does that process work on your end?
So I've been doing this for just over 15 years. So I've got to the stage now where most of the submissions that come in will be targeted at me. So people know what I like. I mean, I do enough talks and enough and generally put out what sort of books I'm after. they would usually come to me. Sometimes someone will submit something to a colleague of mine and they'll send it across. One of my greatest resources is my authors. I mean, the reason I'm here is because one of my authors sort of said, "Oh, you should chat to Ed," and I think that informal network of writers who I know, I like, and I work with, who understand my tastes because they know that I like their books. Chances are, if there's something that they think is good, that's going to be something that I should consider as well. So those are the three. There are some blind submissions. Dear sir, please read this. I'd say if that's the way that you're approaching an agent, you're making life hard for yourself, because it's not that difficult to find out. This idea that agents are somehow unknowable, I think is nonsense. Has been nonsense now for quite a long time. Do you want to work out what I'm like and what I like? Then you could do so. And I think that's probably the way to do it. It's about building a network. For an unpublished writer, knowing other writers is the starting point. Don't worry about agents. Don't worry about publishers. Get to know other people who are doing what you're doing and see what comes. Talk. That's kind of always been my ethos. The downside of that is it means that if I do sign up a writer who knows another writer, then there's a sort of team of them all starting, make a gang up on you.
Like, yeah, I'm going to seem like a ganged up on. Why aren't you representing her the same way you're representing me?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So much politics. Honestly, it's like being in the school playground. It's great fun. But no, so the first point of contact is usually an email or a phone call. I mean, the days of kind of meeting people in person are gone. And please never turn up at an agent's door. It's a very bad look. But so it starts off with an email, and the fundamentals of how I choose the writers I want to work with is whether they're a good writer. I'm sure there are some agents who will take into account the profile of the person, or will be looking to fill a certain box. For me, it's all about the writing.
So how does that come in terms of your slate? Would you represent people who are doing something similar because they're good? Because I'm coming from a writer's perspective. So there is this sense that sometimes people get rejected because something else similar is already going out into the world. Do you operate like that, or?
I don't know. That's quite hard. It's important to cover all bases. There's no point in me having two writers doing the same thing. But another agent will see one of my writers doing well, and they will go, "Oh, I need some of that." So cozy crime is the best example. So Richard Osmond obviously has completely redefined the landscape for cozy crime. I look after a writer called Robert Thorogood. So Robert he created Death in Paradise, the TV show, and he wrote the tie-ins for that. After those books came to their natural conclusion, he started up a new series. It's called the Marlowe Murder Club. And because of the way his contract was structured and the length of time it took him to write, it meant that even though that book was contracted before Richard Osman, it was actually published after, which turned out to be a great benefit. Because it meant that the market had been established and Robert was able to come through. And there's a TV show coming out in March. Book 3 of the series has just gone into the top 10 bestseller list. So from my perspective, the fact that another writer was doing that elsewhere was good, but I didn't have anybody else doing it. So at the moment, I wouldn't sign another kind of nice, safe, middle-class, cozy crime writer.
Yeah.
Partly because I don't think any would be as good as Robert, but also because Robert is mine, and therefore I don't need to fill that gap. So there's a balance between putting all your eggs in the same basket, and then the chickens hatching and fighting each other. I think the analogy breaks down there. But so there is building your list in a way that makes sense is important. Some agents specialize just in crime, let's say, just in thrillers. There are some who just do science fiction and fantasy. I like doing a bit of it. It's part of the fun.
So Ed, I mean, I'm coming to this from the other end of the spectrum to Sarah. So my experience is on the shop floor. I'm coming from a bookseller's kind of perspective, and I've been doing that for about 10 years now. So my experience of seeing these authors come through the system is usually maybe a few months ahead of it landing on our doorstep, but we do see these trends, you know, and you just mentioned cozy crime. When these trends seem to appear on our end, I'm curious on your end whether you see the seeds of that, whether you start seeing the same kind of submissions, or whether you don't necessarily get too bothered by the end product at your stage, whether you're kind of maybe too separate from that. I'm just interested in how
I like
you
the use of the term end product.
yeah.
Books, they're called books.
How dare you?
I know, I know.
I remember
It's
sitting in
almost
a
as
meeting.
bad as saying items. I don't
Honestly,
know.
I remember sitting in a meeting with a publisher where it was units, content were the only terms used. I was like, I had to put my hand up, be like, "You're talking about books, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's not just content." No, I mean the timelines of publishing, and you will know the timelines of publishing are such that the chasing after trends doesn't really work. If I sign an author today, and it takes me 6 months to edit their book into shape, another couple of months to sign with the publisher and get the contract out. So at that point, their book will be scheduled for publication a minimum of 12 months in advance. There are very rare situations where they will crash a book through, but most of the time publishers don't like to, because there are other books in the way and they'd have to move something else out. So by the time the book is published, you're looking at 18 to 24 months from the point at which that author was signed up. So the trend that the agent was chasing when they signed them up is gone.
Yeah.
Usually what happens is that the trend will have become part of the wider mainstream, and that's what's happened with cozy crime. It's just part of crime, just as Scandi crime has just become part of like chick lit all those years ago, just got subsumed into kind of commercial fiction. So the trend becomes part of the commercial mainstream, or it goes back to what it was. You looked at something like the erotica boom with E.L. James and Sylvia Day. Those books were kind of trendy and everyone was talking about them for a bit. Now they're still selling very well, but just in a slightly less high profile way. So we can't chase after trends. At the same time, we have to have a sense of what the market likes, and the commercial center ground is relatively established. I think most genres have cycled through. The only one that hasn't is westerns, which I love, and just don't sell. They don't sell at all. I had a brilliant like postmodern western that was published about 7 years ago, and I was like, "This is the one," and it wasn't, because no one likes westerns over here. But so you have to have an understanding of the breadth of the market and see where the gap is, predict what's going to come next.
Mhm.
And enough people predict the same thing, suddenly you've got a trend.
And that's something that people say to us as writers as well. It's have a look at when we're pitching, we're supposed to pitch where our book sits next to other people's. But I've always found, well, that's great, but they won't be there, because I've also worked in a bookshop as well. I worked with James, that's how we know each other. So I've seen like how quickly things move through, and I think, well, how am I supposed to pitch my book? Because I know that book won't be on the shelf in 2 years' time. So it is really, you writers have just got to write what you want to write and hope that someone will want to publish it when it comes around. And
that's exactly it. Write what you want to write. Like, believe in your own writing. And if you're barking up the wrong tree, then you'll send it to a bunch of agents and they'll tell you that. I think the creative writing boom, the idea that everybody is learning creative writing, I think is wonderful. It means the quality of writing in general is improved. I see a lot of really, really good submissions that are just not the right book. And if that's a good writer, then I can have a conversation with them. And I could say, look, you have talent as a writer, but the book that you're writing is not going to work commercially for these reasons. If I see someone who's got a brilliant idea but can't write for toffee, then there's nothing I can do. because I don't have time to teach people to write. And there are better people who can do that. So it's a tricky one. The thing I say most to writers is like, do you believe in this? If an author comes to me and they go, "Oh, I've written 3 books," I'm like, "That's great. You're not going to get all 3 of them published simultaneously. Which is the one you're most excited about? Which is the one that you believe in?" And I think that self-belief is very, very difficult when you're chasing your tail. Don't worry so much about the trends. If the book is good enough, then it's up to an agent to work out what to do with it, and then a publisher works out how to get it to you guys. I too have worked in a bookshop. Everybody in publishing has worked. bookshop. I looked after the weird upstairs back section of Waterstones in Preston, where I grew up. On the first day there, I drew a sign that said, "Please go to another till." And I would put it on my till. It was where all the specialist art books were and all the customer collections were. So I put the sign, "Please go to another till," up. And then I would just sit down below the counter and read all day. It was great.
You're giving us a bad name, Ed.
But it was good. I challenged myself to read, because I was like a wet behind the ears English graduate. So I challenged myself to read the kind of books that I wouldn't normally have read. I had an amazing, it was like this halcyon day where I was like Jilly Cooper. I read my first Marion Keyes, and then just like all the things that were like the bestseller list that if you've done an English degree, you've never gone anywhere near.
Yeah.
Because they're just like, "Oh, please, sir, have some more Trollope." It's like, I don't want Trollope. I want Marion Keyes.
So Ed, let's go back to, so we've briefly touched on that kind of first stage where you might get submitted something directly from an author. Let's say it's landed on your desk or they've contacted you directly. At that stage, how hands-on are you? I mean, how much of the editor kind of hat are you wearing? Like what kind of process do you have with the author on getting that to a point ready to submit to a publisher? And can you explain, obviously that's going to be different with every book, but in general, can you sort of explain that stage for us?
Okay, so there are different types of agent. I mean, just as if you think of any business, there's a kind of small indie and then there's large corporate. So literary agencies are exactly the same. So there are smaller, kind of much more bespoke agencies, of which we are the type. Then there are big corporate behemoths, and at the moment, everyone's getting bought out by everybody else. So Curtis Brown was bought out by UTA. CAA have set up an office over here. WME has been running. So these are big global like entertainment companies. So I can't speak about what they do. You need to interview one of them. We editorially, I think having that impact on an author is very, very important to me. So I will sign up something that I think has potential, and then I will work with that writer to make it better. What we'd usually do is we submitted 3 chapters initially. If that's good, I will request the whole manuscript. If I read the whole manuscript and I still like it, then I will have a think about what it is that needs to be done. And very rarely is there a book where nothing needs to be done. I think I've sold one book in my career where it came in and I could say, "Don't touch a word."
That is ideal. Do you find, I mean, obviously that's rare, but do you find even once you've passed that on, the publisher's going to rip it apart? Are they going to?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not rip it apart. Rip it apart's a bit dramatic. No, I mean, it's a bit of a truism, but the idea is that your first editor is yourself, and that's the most important phase, because that's where you work out what the book is and who you are as a writer. You know, that's where all the soul searching takes place. After that, you submit to an agent and you go through another editorial process. And that is usually making the book better, usually making the book shorter, and getting it in a position where it is good enough for a publisher to buy. The third editing is once the publisher is paying you money in order to edit your book. So the dynamic of the relationship has changed. They're no longer saying, "I think that character should have blonde hair instead of brown." They are saying, "We've paid you money for this book. We need to sell as many copies as we can. This is what we think needs to be done to help you sell it." So you're always going to have more editing. A book is never finished. I mean, I worked with a writer called William Trevor, and the latter stages of his career. The first book that he ever published, he withdrew from sale because he said, "We never got it right." You know, so even an author who has got that kind of career still thinks there's work to be done. Yeah. So your book is never done. That's the moral.
But it's kind of reassuring as well, because I'm just editing a short story and I'm like, why does it keep getting rejected? I'm like, because it's just not right. I haven't worked out what's wrong with it yet, but something isn't right. And I'll just have to keep chipping away at it. And it's the same with the books for publishers. And a lot of people, the first book doesn't get through. It might be the second or third book that gets through.
Mm.
I know we said we weren't going to talk about money, but just going back to the beginning again, obviously when you pick by the time your book's being bought by a publisher, there's money changing hands. When you first take a client on, there's no money exchanging hands there, is there?
No,
at the beginning?
very important, very important. So we're part of a trade association called the Association of Authors Agents. And part of the code of conduct is we are not allowed to charge a reading fee. There are some agencies that do, and they are not good agencies. If you can imagine the sheer volume of submissions that we get, I mean, we get thousands and thousands every year. If we were charging a reading fee, then we'd basically be able to cover our rent just by doing that. So no money changes. The only way I can make money out of my authors is by selling something on their behalf and taking commission. Some agencies set up a kind of side hustle editorial agency. Again, that's not something we do. That's something that I think is a little bit of a gray area. Essentially, you're leveraging a literary agency's name in order to sell a commercial product that's kind of in competition. But no money changes hands until we sell something. The publisher pays you to write. You do not need to pay me to read your book.
That's really good to know. I mean, I think you hear some horror stories maybe where people get charged ridiculous money and then it still never makes it onto a shop floor, you know.
Yeah, that unfortunately there are, I mean, just as I said, like publishing is a business. And so there are people at the sharp end who behave in a kind of disreputable way. And there are literary consultancies who don't actually provide any kind of consultancy service. There are vanity publishers. That's a publisher who will take your money and they will tell you that they're going to market this and do that. And then on publication day, a pallet of books will turn up at your door, and that's it. And you go, right, how do I get it into Waterstones? They're like, it's not our problem. So there are lots of companies that don't do it right. The bit of the industry I'm in is what I would call like the kind of the straightforward, maybe slightly more old-fashioned way of doing things, where author writes book, gets agent, sells to publisher, book is published. And it works. It works. Indie publishing is a totally separate thing, and I think people who do that and do that well are incredible. And I work with some of those writers. I have so-called hybrid authors who indie publish some things and then traditionally publish some things, and it's brilliant. The different skill sets bring different things. But if someone's asking you for $2,000 for unspecified editorial and publishing services, then you have to ask questions.
Yeah. As well, talking about the not getting paid until you sell the book, people have told me that your agent, it's a relationship more or less. Like I know people who've had an agent hasn't gone well and they've changed, and it's really important to find the right person to work with as well. It isn't just getting your book into the first person. How much time do you spend kind of building that relationship?
Oh, it's very important. I mean, it is a relationship, and it's that weird combination of being personal and professional. So I need to be competent at my job. So if I don't sell books, then I don't have any income. So it's quite important that I make decisions based on that. But at the same time, the way that you work with an author is very, very personal. Authors need different things from their agents. There are some with whom I'm genuinely friends, whose weddings I've been to, whose funerals I've been to. And that's kind of part of it. It's a sort of cradle to grave kind of job. Equally, I have a couple of authors who just see me as a kind of accountancy software, you know, where they've got, if they're a series publisher, it works like clockwork. And so the income comes in, we process it, we check the statements, and then we send it on. Usually within that case, I will make a point of getting to know that author better. But it varies enormously. And yes, if you sign with an agent and the vibe isn't right, then you are allowed to change. It gets messier the more books you've published, because your contract stays behind. So you would end up having income coming from different agencies at different times.
Oh, okay.
But equally, I have authors who I've inherited from other agents. Similarly, I've had authors who have left me and gone on to other agents. But that's the nature of it. People's needs change, and what they're looking for changes.
Yeah.
So in terms of that relationship, then, if you're looking at the career of an author, starting with book one, hopefully just book one, and that gets through to you. You've worked with them on editorial. The next stage is obviously sending it on to publishers. Could you explain that process slightly? Because I think there seems to be a lot of mystery behind it. You know, it just the phrasing of, oh, well, we sent it to the publisher, you know, it's that first stage that I think I'd like to hear about. And you hear about these big bidding wars for the big ones, between multiple publishers. How does that work? I mean, going up for auction, I mean, how is that a thing?
Well, the ones you hear about are the ones where the kind of the dream scenarios happen. So if you can imagine, if I have a book that's edited, ready to go, I've worked out the way I'm going to pitch it, I'll draw up a list of the editors I think I would send it to. So there's people I know are going to like the book. So I need to know all of the editors in London, basically, who work in these genres that I'm selling books. And, you know, that does involve getting to know them sort of socially, but also a lot of people who've worked in agencies go into editorial and vice versa. So there's a lot of there's a lot of crossover. So if I have a list of editors, I want to make sure I've covered all the major publishers, and then I'll talk to the author. I will say, look, have you always dreamt of being published by X or Y publisher? Or I say, who do you know? Were you edited by somebody? You know, is the CEO of Faber and Faber your godfather? You know, that kind of stuff. There is an element of authors building a network before they go on submission. It's not necessary. Some people can come in cold, and that's totally fine. But the anything that an author can bring through their creative writing, through short stories they've had published, anything like that helps. So then phone them up and talk to them. Some editors don't like talking on the phone, so email the book through and say, look, let's have a chat once you've read it. The ideal scenario then is that you get multiple ones all offering for the book, and that's what an auction is, where I will set a boundary and I'll say, look, if you want to offer, do it by this date. And then, you know, the numbers thin out. Eventually they'll get to a price where nobody's willing to go beyond it. In that case, I'll take the author to meet them, and the author can then decide. Ideally, you want the person who's offering the most money to be the one that the author likes best. That very rarely happens, but that's just the nature of it. You know, sometimes the person offering the most money isn't the right editor for the book, and that's a factor as well. We don't often go with an underbidder, but if it's the right person, then there's no reason why we would. It's about a conversation, and that's why you need to have a good relationship with the author, because you need to have these chats. Equally, there are some books you send on submission, nobody offers. You need to have a strong enough relationship that you can deal with that scenario as well. There's always going to be good conversations and bad conversations. There's no point having a relationship with your agent that is just predicated on the good times, because every author has bad times.
And is that something you would then, you know, worst case scenario, you'd bring it back? Would you continue just working on it and then try again?
I mean, it doesn't happen very often. Like I said, I need to sell books in order to have a functioning business. So, no, usually you would take a book as far as you can. If there's nothing if you can't work out what the problem is, then you have to accept that it's just bad luck, and luck is a big part of it. Put it to one side and move on to the next thing. Or you go through the feedback. You say, look, these editors have said this. We can keep working on this book. But if the author has been writing something else in the meantime, you have an open conversation about what the best way to do. So, I mean, someone like Beryl Bainbridge, right? So I looked after Beryl, again, from sort of the end of her life. Her first published book, I think, was her fourth or fifth that she'd written. Some of the early ones, which are brilliant, didn't get published till much later, and got rejections all over the place.
Sure.
So when you're published, that becomes your debut. And then you rewrite all of the narrative about, you know, the J.K. Rowling, I was rejected by every publisher in town. And that's true. Like, most writers have got rejected by some. I think that my favorite was when Marlon James won the
Yeah.
Booker Prize. He said he'd been rejected by, I think, 150 publishers. Like, who are these? Who are all these publishers? But that's it.
insane.
This is part of the narrative, you know. The business, there is always rejection at every stage. You're going to get rejected by agents, but then you'll find the right agent. When the book goes out, you get rejected by publishers, but you'll find the right publisher. Even if you have the perfect trajectory, agent first time, publisher first time, you know, super lead slot, publisher putting loads behind it. On the day of publication, you'll get a 1-star Amazon review from someone, or like a nasty review in the mail. So, like, be prepared. I think writers, it's a process of toughening up. Anyone working creatively has to be prepared for rejection.
It's a strange thing because we talk about this quite a lot when I run workshops and things, and there isn't really a solution. You've just got to keep going. Really,
yes.
you've got to want to do it and keep going. I think is the only way.
Exactly, and nobody's. I mean, the thing is that no one's forcing you to.
No.
And there's no one's forcing you to go through the process of getting it published. I mean, there's plenty of validity in just writing for your own benefit. Writing as therapy, I think, is a normal thing to do. If you want to get your book published, then you would have to accept that there is an element of risk, and it's not necessarily going to be all good news. Perseverance, talent, and perseverance.
That's what we all want. I might get that in a t-shirt, I think. So what, I don't know if it's coming through to you, James, but the main thing that I think I felt like everything was quite disconnected, even though I feel like I've got quite a good hold on the industry. I felt like it was like agent, publisher, this, but it feels like a much more fluid relationship, especially when you talk about, you might know an editor already who you get a book in and you're like, I know that I'm going to take this person on, I'm going to pitch it to this editor and they're going to say yes. Are you getting that kind of fluid?
Yeah. I guess what I wasn't so sure on was how I kind of assumed it was very much, well, you just pass it on.
Yeah.
You know, it goes out into the world and then hopefully it makes some money, and that then maybe comes through you and goes to the author. I kind of vaguely had that quite sparse relationship in mind, but there's a lot more to it. And I guess what I really want to know is, once it's published, you're still working with an author. You've still got a relationship with this author. So what comes after?
So some agents work on a book-to-book basis. So you go, I like this book, I'm going to represent you for this book. We sign the author. So I part of it, there has to be a first book that I've read and that I think is brilliant to start everything off. But I also want to know what you're working on next. I want to be able to plan out, you know, we want to build a career for a writer rather than just get a book published. By the time the book actually turns up in a box at my desk, I'm usually a couple of books down the track. So it's like, that's a great thing. I'm delighted by it, but I'm actually thinking about what comes next. So I think after the book comes out, there's plenty more things to be done. I won't talk about money specifically, but like the structure of a contract, the author will be paid in advance that is divided into segments. So some of it on signature, some on delivery of the final manuscript of the book and approval, and then on publication, either just on a hardback or hardback and paperback publication. So already that covers a span of 12, 18, 24 months. From first signature of a contract right the way through to paperback publication is a long period of time. In that time, we are doing everything else. So we're copied in on all the emails about editorial matters, about the jacket, about working out how to do it, about marketing strategy. We'll be working on foreign rights, sending the book out to translation publishers, either in-house, we have a brilliant in-house rights department, or with co-agents in countries like Japan and China, where you need someone on the ground. We'll be pitching for film and TV, which is a big part of it now. A lot of the streamers, a lot of places like Netflix, they want to option a book to then develop. They want underlying IP, so a book, a game, a computer game, whatever. So we do a lot of that and a lot of conversations. Then twice a year we have a book fair. London and Frankfurt are the two biggest ones. So there, all of that becomes concentrated. So I'm seeing back-to-back editors, film scouts, everybody. So there's a huge amount to be done. At the same time, through that process, the author's going to send me their next book, which I take a look at, and hopefully it's brilliant. And if it's not brilliant, then we have a chat about that. You know, that's part of the fun. So it's a continual process. So the author is deemed to be out of contract once they've delivered the book.
Right.
So that is when we start a conversation about their next contract. Or they may be on a 2-book deal or a 3-book deal, in which case they just got to crack on and write the next one. So it is continuous and it's very fluid. I think from an author's perspective, it'll seem a long time. You go, my publication date is 18 months away. That's miles. It's like, well, there's quite a lot to do before then.
I mean, you briefly mentioned film and TV. I mean, I'm quite interested. I've been speaking to a few publishers lately and asking about their success stories, you know, and quite often they'll mention, oh, well, you know, we did really well with this book, and oh, you know, it's just being optioned. Now, what part of that comes to the agent rather than just being negotiated with the publisher? I mean, could you give us maybe an example where you've been involved?
Publishers always try to cut in on film and television, and we never let them because they're good at. Publishers are brilliant at publishing books. They don't know anything about the TV world. They like it's exciting. No, we will reserve those rights. Again, this is part of what you have an agent for. The question is always who is in the best position to do the best job with those rights. As the author with an agent, and we work with a filmmaker, brilliant book to screen agent, that is the best way to get you in front of TV companies. Going through the publisher, it is circuitous route. Often we'll get inquiries, we'll come into the publisher, they'll pass them to us. So no, we say an option. The way that the kind of book to screen world works. So a producer, be it a big broadcaster or just like an independent, they will pay a sum of money to have an option through which they can develop that book for screen. So if it's a small independent producer, they will have to come up with a script and a concept and then pitch it to the BBC. Sometimes the BBC will option something direct, in which case you're kind of jumped ahead. You should definitely get a film agent on. I can recommend ours to talk through all this. It's very complicated, but the upshot is having the publisher in there as well makes it even messier and much less likely. I mean, right. So just to give you a sense, I would say that we get maybe 20, but somewhere between 20 and 30 options every year. In my entire career so far, I think I've had 3 things actually made.
Wow.
Yeah, one of them, which is coming out, the Marlow Murder Club that I told you. I went to the press screening of it just last week. It's absolutely brilliant. Oh, so good.
Yeah, I know a few people who've had books or pieces of work optioned and then nothing happens. So they get like a pot of money and they just wait and hope and then nothing happens. And
they might renew it after 12 months or 18 months, but they might not. Sometimes, I mean, I had one option where they paid a reasonably large amount of money. We literally never heard from the producer again.
Wow.
We never heard. I was like, that's amazing. And I would email me like, hi there. You doing anything? And I think they have a development budget and they're just like, we need to hoover in some stuff. But when it does happen, it's very exciting. And part of this goes back to what I was talking about before, about the agent is there to help kind of build a career, right? So you hear a lot about the kind of these blockbuster, you know, £1 million advances, all of that stuff. I mean, it's nonsense. It's a tiny proportion. It's like footballers. You know, you hear about the really good ones who get paid the big bucks. There's loads and loads of people who make a good living without being like a superstar. And I think with writers, obviously we want to get the writer up to that kind of superstar level. But most of the time, it's about building a sustainable career where you can either work another job and write alongside it, or hopefully at some point work just on writing. And that's about having a UK publisher, a US publisher, a decent number of translation deals, each one of those coming with an advance, then an option every couple of years, extra money coming in, audiobook royalties coming in. If you add all of those up, even if each of those individual slivers is not a spectacular sum of money, it adds up into a proper income that you can live off. And I think most agents are trying to find a way for an author to be able to live off their writing. Like I say, some may not want to, but it's about building something sustainable. And sometimes I see this sort of stupid over-the-top deals for some poor 20-year-old author whose book tanks and they're never heard of again. I mean, that's a That's a sad thing.
Yeah. I think it's made me realize how much more I think in terms of the life cycle of a book, it feels like agent is one of the first people after writer.
And
Would
the
you?
most important.
Obviously,
Yeah, of course.
but it's also that long term. It does feel very much. You get an agent, you get published, you go and you're a superstar. But your agent's there all along, and that I think that's what's coming from you is what I talk about a lot when I talk to writers is about building these networks and these communities and it being if you do want to be published, it is a job. You can't just send your work off and it'll just happen. There is quite a lot of work aside from the writing and everything it's been
It's been great. I think it's definitely filled in a few of the gaps in my knowledge. I was wondering if maybe we could end on maybe some advice. I mean, if we've got authors listening to this or writers who are slogging away at something that they love, but maybe don't know what the next step is. I mean, could you maybe just give them some advice on what maybe you'd recommend?
Well, I think part of the reason that you find agents want to do talks like this is to kind of demystify the process.
Mhm.
The thing about there is no real mystery. There is a movement that argues that within any creative industry, not everybody that is producing the whatever the thing is, be it music or books or films, because not every single one of those can be successful, it means there has to be somebody somewhere who is evil and who is dashing the hopes of the kind of creatives. And within publishing, agents are usually called the gatekeepers, the people who are keeping that out. We're not at all. Like by the sheer numbers of books we get sent relative to the numbers of books that are published, means that we have to say no to some stuff. Nobody does it. No one enjoys that. Nobody's doing that with a spring in their step. But also, there's no point in giving a kind of false hope to somebody who doesn't have the kind of technical ability to necessarily get published. So my advice is to know your own work, know exactly what it is you're doing, and have an idea of where you're trying to get to. Often I will meet up with a writer and who'd written something good, and I'll say, look, so how do you see this book? Where do you see it being published? If at that point you haven't done any research about agencies, publishers, the process, any of that stuff, then it's very difficult, because for me, I then have two jobs. I've got to try and get this book into shape. I've also got to teach you everything about the entire publishing industry. Now, that's something I'm happy to do, but I think there's so much information out there. So I think while you're writing, while you're getting your book ready, be interested in the industry that you're trying to get into. Listen to podcasts, read newspaper articles about it, get some sense of it. Use your networks, use creative writing forums. Within any writers group, there's always going to be somebody who's published. There's someone who's got an agent and his book is on submission. Talk to them and find out about it. It all comes down to how good you are as a writer. And as much as you can dress it up, not everybody is a writer good enough to get published. But it doesn't mean that you can't give it a good try. And if you believe in yourself and you get the cards falling in the right order, then why not? I think everyone has as good a chance as anyone else.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a really good note to end on, I think. Just because I've only really just thought about it. Obviously, this is going to be part of a bit of a series. We're going to be discussing the process of getting published with various people throughout that chain of publishing. Who would you suggest we talk to next?
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Oh, I like it. This is like it's like passing the baton onto other people. Well, you're going to know who the kind of the obvious people are, I mean, which is writers and editors. I think everybody else who's kind of involved within the system. So definitely talk to a book to screen agent. So we work with Emily Howard Whitlock at the Artist Partnership, who is, I would say, the best in London. I think within a publisher, there are lots of other jobs. So the people on the marketing and publicity side, people on the production side, people on the sales side, really important and kind of a bit unsexy, because they're doing the kind of commercial bit, but they're still passionate about what they do. Books. You'll kind of have to talk to yourself about book sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think you should just get a good spread of authors. I think I'm relatively rare that my list covers the full gamut. So I have everything from authors who've won the Booker right the way through to authors who've won a British Fantasy Award. So there is kind of the commercial, like the kind of establishment hardback, but also the kind of genre, the slightly more niche, and all points in between. So I get a good perspective. I think authors only have their own particular experience. So in order to get a kind of general sense of it, you have to talk to every author, which I think is quite hard to do. But no, I think the more information there is out there, the better. I don't think an author can ever be too informed about the industry they're trying to get into.
It's a job, isn't it? It's
a job.
You wouldn't apply for a job without knowing something about the job you're going to apply for, and that's what it is, isn't it?
And information is out there. There's this thing called the internet. It's pretty exciting. And I get asked often, how do I find out about literary agents? I'm like, just Google literary agent. Like, I mean, it's that simple. you will get a list. By default, Google will come up with probably the top 20, the top 30 in London or in New York or wherever you are. You click on there, you have a look at what they've got, and that's your start. Your research begins.
Or better yet, take a listen to Books Unpacked and hear Ed Wilson talk about it himself.
Refer to himself in the third person. Ed Wilson. Keep an eye.
Thanks so much, Ed. This has been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
It's a delight. Lovely to be here. And, good luck with the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you learned something new like we always do.
Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to hear more.
And you can find us in all the places you usually find your podcasts.
Until next time, keep reading.